Welcome back to Ladies of Another View. And I want to welcome back our guest, Stefan Padfield, who is the Executive Director with Free Enterprise. Welcome back. And
Good to
what's
be
not to
back.
love about Free Enterprise? Free. Not having your hands tied behind your back, not being able to get loans and business loans because, who did you vote for? That's just crazyville. Whether that went on behind the scenes back in the day, I don't know, but it was pretty rampant in recent years, and I'm
Can you
glad it's going
remind
back.
me, like, what free enterprise is? Like, for a layman?
Good question.
Oh,
Thank
sure.
you for
So,
asking.
so we are. I work for the Free Enterprise Project. It's part of the National Center for Public Policy Research. It's one of a number of projects there. I certainly encourage all your viewers to go check out the work we're doing by visiting our site at nationalcenter.org. But if you take a step back more broadly and you're looking at free market capitalism and what sorts of things we defend in order to get the benefits of that, which certainly, whether you want to view it as the optimal way to run the economy of a society or the least worst, either way, it's what we should be doing. And as we move away from that, things get very problematic, and we've shown that over and over again. And in terms of contrast, because I always like talking about these things in terms of as opposed to what, right? And so we can say free market capitalism as opposed to, for example, fascism, actually, and communism, right? Where the state has significant control over the decisions being made by the producers of products and the distribution of capital. And so the idea is, and it's withstood the test of time over and over again, that if you grant people private property rights and you allow them to make buy-sell decisions in a market, that the pricing mechanism will signal best where those funds should go. And the result of all that, long story short, is that you provide the most opportunity and give the best chance for everyone to end up in the best possible place for their own well-being, as opposed to, again, a system that is very much aligned with the word equity that you hear a lot these days, where you're focused on equality of outcomes and we don't really care whether you're producing or not. We're going to make sure there's enough of this group and that group, which even if you were to buy into the initial premise, ultimately ends up being more harmful to the very people those sorts of initiatives are supposed to help, as opposed to free market capitalism, where the opportunity is very alive and vibrant.
So, in a free market, why is it that we have these big corporations? They slid into DEI and the ESG scores because a lot of them were kind of had their arms behind their back, like, hey, you don't do this, you're not going to get these business loans.
Right.
But now they're sliding back in, and they always say follow the money. So how do they get there, and how are they sliding back? Just the short answer, because I'm going to look at some of your other articles.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of forces, and people have done a lot of great work unpacking that. But if you look at, for example, the big asset managers and the big proxy advisors who really push and drive a lot of corporate governance, they are invested in ESG and DEI because they make money from it. They make money from consulting. They make money from funds that they slap the ESG label on. So that's just one example. And you can find a number of different levers where the money is creating incentives and pushing people to embrace these agendas. But now we're seeing the costs start to be revealed when the stock price, for example, drops by 30% when their DEI initiatives are exposed to the public.
Okay, I'm just going to go through these articles. We're going to just put them up.
They're awesome.
Well, and because I want you to talk in general, what you think is the most important takeaway from these. So you talked about, is Dell too woke for federal government work? Are CVS and Mondelez and McDonald's silencing shareholders? Like, really? Is that happening? Unsustainable corporate DEI hypocrisy. Did Verizon defraud the FCC? And the last one, what do you find? Or, well, I guess that was the last one on the DEI hypocrisy. So you are going through all these different angles. I just wanted people to see the kind of work you're doing. You're getting right in there. You're finding the problem. You're noticing things even before the rest of us even hear about it. So what are you seeing right now on the landscape? What's the number one thing you're fighting and working on?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for highlighting that work. I will say, anybody that writes, at least in part for a living, there's this idea of, where do you get your ideas? And one thing I will say is that our landscape, our corporate landscape, is so full of bad actors and bad behavior that it's almost as if the list of things to write about, I can't keep up with it. All right. So that's why you'll see me sort of dipping my toe in a variety of areas. But the biggest thing I would say right now is we've had a number of places where we've had both pro-DEI and anti-DEI proposals, and they have both been defeated. I've actually, my next op-ed that should be coming out next Monday or Tuesday is going to be on this specifically. And what we've seen the left do is they point to the anti-DEI proposal and they say, oh, that got over 90% against votes, so therefore we're going to run a headline that says shareholders are pro-DEI. But it's absolutely ludicrous because in the exact same meeting, there will be a pro-DEI proposal that also gets defeated by over 90%, right? And I think what the reality is that we're seeing essentially the large asset managers and to some extent the proxy advisors that control a lot of the votes are basically trying to pull back on the 4 votes on either side. But underneath that is still a bias and also a corruption. Because if you think about what the public really cares about in this space, the public, we've already seen in our latest national election, is not pro-DEI. It's not pro-ESG. So for those votes to be anything other than, say, 60-40 in favor of getting back to neutral and getting away from DEI, there's something corrupt going on. So I think that right now is certainly the issue that I'm focused on most often when I talk to people.
And a lot of the stuff that you write is controversial, right? And you talked about earlier how a lot of people are scared to talk out because of, getting blackballed or, the lashback on that. So have you had any, threats or any backlash on the articles that you're writing and exposing?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think we've actually got one piece that came out a couple of weeks ago that we're potentially looking into pursuing some defamation claims against. I mean, it's just the standard, you're a racist, you're homophobic, you're anti-gay. I had one where we asked the corporation, again, to sever ties with HRC's CEI. And I think it was law360.com off the top of my head, ran a headline that said we were filing an anti-gay proposal, right? And you get this stuff all the time. We are not anti-gay. In fact, I think it's a very fair argument to say that the trans movement itself is anti-gay, because if you're a man and you like men, they're not going to tell you you're gay. They're going to say you're a transgender woman, right? So just this sort of just the smears go on, and certainly we get the subtle and not so subtle threats. But to some extent, you have to wake up in the morning, you have to look in the mirror, and I do think there is something to the courage that we can imbue one another with, right? So you do your show, that gives people courage. I speak out, that can give people some courage. Certainly, I think one of the things that has led to Trump's, winning 2 presidential elections is he just stood up and said what the majority of the country was thinking but afraid to say, and he basically gave permission to the whole country to speak the truth. And so those sorts of examples, which we get over and over again, thankfully, there are so many courageous people who just refuse to be cowed by these, you're a racist, you're homophobic, all these things. It's just basically, we've heard it all before. So can we start talking substance now? And so that's basically, I think, what gets me going every morning is I just can't see doing it any other way. I mean, we live in a society that is riddled with lies and corruption, and I just have to try to speak the truth.
I started out in journalism at University of Detroit, and it was so important to have the truth. And back in the day, if you reported a falsehood, you would lose your job. But now there's an agenda where they're all working together to report falsehoods, and nobody loses their job. I think they get a pat on the back. And so the legacy media has been a part of that and the misreporting. So it's easy for them to call you racist or homophobe. When in reality, it's like, no, we're just talking about free enterprise. We're talking about what's fair, what should be happening, and not these agendas being pushed, right?
And instead of calling names, we should be solution focused. Like, where are the solutions? That I always, when we talk about courage.
Well, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And there's, one quick point is that whole shift in journalism is very purposeful, right? Again, you've got the whole postmodernism. There is no truth. There's only your truth and my truth and all of that garbage, right? And then you've got the activist mindset where people are going into these various jobs and they think of themselves first and foremost as an activist because that's what they've been taught from 4th grade on. And so it's not surprising at all that entire institutions from top to bottom have no real regard for the truth and are only interested in the way they can advance the power that they think is on the right side of history.
Right, they want to mold society by the way they're reporting. So thank you, Stefan, for all the good work you do, because we need people like you letting us know what's going on and doing the hard work. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.